Now we move on to Metropolis. In the Christopher Reeve films, Metropolis was made to look like New York. They literally built replicas of actual New York City streets to make Metropolis more and more like New York. In fact, when he flew over Metropolis, he would fly past New York landmarks like the Statue of Liberty. Um, Having grown up with that version of Superman, I suppose it is iconic. Um, the version of Metropolis from Lois and Clark was certainly a very good version of Metropolis. Um, I do think the version from Smallville was quite a good version of Metropolis. It's probably the version of the Daily Planet that I remember the most. Simply having spent more time there, there's episode after episode of Smallville from season 6 on. You have scenes there. Um, Now the version of Metropolis from Man of Steel, um, it's going to be iconic because it's the biggest. It is the one they destroyed the most of because holy crap, they destroyed Metropolis in that movie. Um, I do like all of the versions. I'm probably going to remember most the Daily Planet from Smallville as my when I think of Metropolis, that's what I'll think of. So at the Daily Planet, starting from the top, you've got Perry White. Now you've got Jackie Cooper's the iconic version of Perry White that we grew up with from the Christopher Reeve films. You have, I believe the guy's name is his name is Lane Smith from Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, who played a very different take on it. He played a southerner version of Perry White. I did like his performance. Then, of course, you have Michael McKean played a somewhat forgettable version of the pre-editor in chief Perry White on Smallville, and then you have Lawrence Fishburne. Yeah, I did have to look that up. And Lawrence Fishburne is probably he gives the best performance as Perry White. Hard to say simply because he doesn't have that many lines, but there's a scene where someone is in danger and he won't leave them, and the expressions on his face won me over to that version of Perry White. But I'm still gonna have to say Jackie Cooper is the most iconic, with an honorable mention to Lane Smith because he was cool. I'm sorry, but Cowboy Perry White is cool. We move on to our Lois Lanes. Now, Lois Lane, Margot Kidder introduced us to Lois Lane. She was a pretty good version of Lois Lane, but that was the version of Lois Lane that was a man who made it, a woman who made it in a man's world. Um, you then have, of course, Terry Hatcher. Terry Hatcher was almost an update of what Margot Kidder had done. She was a great Lois Lane. She's probably the Lois Lane that a lot of people will remember. Also, a woman who made it in a man's world, but a woman who was seeing the glass ceiling start to break a little bit. Our Smallville Lois Lane is, of course, Erica Durance. She's probably my favorite just because I saw more of her than any other version of Lois Lane, and I like the way they twisted the romance aspect of their relationship, seeing as Tom Welling never played the fumbling, bumbling Clark Kent until the very end. Um, when she meets this guy who looks like an Abercrombie and Finch model who goes around rescuing people every chance he gets, she falls in love with him. It's her crush on him instead of the other way around on Smallville. And I like that. I like the fact that she actually saw Clark Kent and realized, wait, this guy's hot. you know? And I like the fact that when he's talking with her about the fact that as a superhero, he's not going to wear a mask, she's the one who has the idea that if you're not going to wear a mask when you're a superhero, you have to wear a mask when you're not. And it's her idea to come up with this fumbling, bumbling version of Clark Kent that we're familiar with from Christopher Reeve. And so that's the reason why she's actually probably my favorite Lois Lane. Now you get Amy Adams in the Man of Steel film, and she's a great Lois Lane, but I don't think she brought enough to the table to displace any of the others. I have to say, out of all of the characters, she's the one that literally every single time they hire someone else to play her, they do a really great job. There's nothing wrong with Amy Adams' Lois Lane, but I like the other three better, and I like Era Durant's the best. Now, so we're gonna do Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen, um, from Lois and Clark, was a decent version of Jimmy Olsen. There's actually two versions of Jimmy Olsen. There's the version of Jimmy Olsen played by Michael Landis and the version of Jimmy Olsen played by Justin Whalen. Both were pretty good versions of Jimmy Olsen. For me, neither of the two is particularly memorable. Jimmy Olsen, for me, is a character that's almost never memorable. He's a character I'm never a big fan of, the superhero sidekick that's not actually a superhero, the kid that's always the hostage. I'm never a fan of that character. So, of course, my favorite Jimmy Olsen then is Aaron Ashmore from Smallville, because he's the version of Jimmy Olsen that's a contemporary of Clark and all of his friends. He's the version of Jimmy Olsen that's not a rookie and not a klutz. He's the version of Jimmy Olsen that at one point in the show gets to be kind of a spy and a little bit of a badass. He's probably going to be my favorite version of Jimmy Olsen, uh, no matter what happens in the sequel to Man of Steel. I don't think anyone's going to replace Aaron Ashmore for me. That leads us finally to Clark Kent himself, specifically the Metropolis version of Clark. Now, the fumbling, bumbling version of Clark, um, Christopher Reeve wins that hands down. For me, almost he originated it. I am not all that familiar with the George Reeves version of Superman and Clark Kent, but Christopher Reeve, his version came out when I was a kid. That's what I grew up with. Then you get Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, and you get Dean Cain. And as I said before, Dean Cain never played Clark Kent as a fumbling, bumbling, klutz. He played Clark Kent as a capable reporter, a little bit of a hayseed, but not that much. And he, he relied simply on his glasses, really, to hide the fact that he was actually Superman. And I liked his take on the whole thing simply because of the one line that he had, that Clark Kent is who I am and Superman is what I can do. Even when he was in the tights, he was still playing Clark Kent. That's a great version of the character. Um, then you get, of course, Smallville and Tom Welling. And he really only plays that particular fumbling, bumbling version of Clark for a few seconds in the final season. When he does it, it's actually hilarious, and he does it very well. But he doesn't do it enough to displace Christopher Reeve. And then you get the Man of Steel version. It's, what's the guy's name? Henry Cavill. And you never see him spill a cup of coffee or anything. He just shows up with the glasses. And I don't know. You're gonna have to show me what happens in the sequel before he's in the running for almost anything. I love that movie, but the main character is probably the least developed character. It's the least developed version of Clark Kent that I've seen. He hasn't become anything yet, and you're gonna have to show me what he becomes in the sequel. So that's the complete version of my personal takes on all of the different film versions of Superman. I know many of you out there are going to disagree with almost everything I said, so feel free to start the word war below in the comments section, and see you next week.